Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we would like to hand over to Lizzie Otai.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first session of the day. It's usually a lot of pressure when you have to go first, but we're going to look at public-private partnerships in generating new investments, opportunities, and financing. And of course, thank you very much, YIDP, for organizing this event because it's more focused on youth. And we know very well we have a huge human resource when we're talking about youth, not only in the African continent, but across the globe. And we're looking at 1.8 billion youth and adolescents. So that's a huge resource. And we're hoping that that's what the whole two-day summit is going to focus on. Now we're going to have, so Collins, you can just rectify me if the keynote presentation has been done, or we can start off with that, or do we go just directly into the session? Either way should be okay. So I don't know whether the keynote has been.
Yes, Liz, the keynote address will not be done for now because there has been some misunderstanding in time.
No worries. Yes, and I know earlier on when we started, we kind of kept saying it's morning somewhere, it's afternoon, it's night somewhere. So no worries, understandable. So ladies and gentlemen, for today's panel, we're expecting to have 3 speakers. So we have Cynthia Kankidi. Cynthia, thank you very much for being on the call. We're still trying to trace down Kelvin Nyamache. He's part of the steering committee. He's actually the steering committee chair of the African Union Youth Assembly. So it's super exciting to actually have him here when he does arrive. And then we have Chris Kaniki. I'm still having a hard time to call him a doctor or a professor, but he's from African Union, Africa CDC Communications Office. So this is going to be an amazing panel once the other 2 speakers log in. But the key focus today is for us to understand what the investment opportunities are when we're talking about public-private partnerships. And I know PPP has been a term that's been used constantly, but it's been focused more within the health space and other key areas. And there's a whole movement where we're acknowledging the fact that youth have been there, even though they've been recipients of programs that we've been having. We're trying to bring them at the table, not only to give them a seat, but also to give them a voice. So we're going to focus on how we're going to generate new investment and opportunities. And these are going to focus more on SDG goals. We only have a couple of years before we reach 2030. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of, running around to make sure we actually achieve these targets for the 17 goals. But we're also going to bring it in and circle around Agenda 2063, which is a big thing for Africa as a continent. So just to introduce my panelists so that we don't waste a lot of time when they actually do log in. So Kelvin Nyamache is Kenyan, an African at heart, which is very good to know. So in 2022, he made history to be elected as the first steering committee chair of the African Union Youth Assembly. So it's going to be super exciting just to get his own perspective because he's pro-youth. He also holds a dual position as the director for events, summits, and conferences. And his executive and role and duties include overseeing the organization's work and fronting the voices of over 870 million youth in the 54 African countries. So this is a good person to have on the panel talking about youth because of the passion and actual work that he does for the youth. Of course, then we're going to have Dr. or Professor Chris Kaniki, serves as a Senior Technical Officer for Strategic Programs in the Office of the Director of the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the South Africa CDC, and he coordinates the African Union COVID-19 vaccination bingo initiative. And we did see that particular initiative ensure that we kind of get vaccines, for the 54 African countries. So he's a medical doctor by profession, a PhD candidate in reproductive health sciences, and a passionate social and public health oriented professional. So I like the fact that they actually doc or prof, soon to be prof, is somebody who's very passionate about reproductive health and also has a bit of experience when it comes to the issues that the continent is facing, especially during the pandemic that we're kind of, just trying to recover from. And I always save the best for last because it looks like this might end up being an all-female panel. We have Cynthia Kandiki, and Cynthia has a robust background in international law, with a keen focus on African development and investments. So Cynthia is dedicated legal profession with a decade-long history of achievements in PPPs. I'm super excited about this, and strategic investment transaction. So she currently serves as a legal counsel at the African Legal Support Facility, or ALSF, where of course, she's going to give us more background on her role and what the organization does, where they conduct legal due diligence of commercial transactions. And this really fits well when we talk about Agenda 2063, because it involves 54 countries. So ladies and gentlemen, those are the speakers for today's session. What I'll do, because we have Cynthia on the call, Cynthia, I'll just put you under the limelight and ask you to unmute yourself, have your video on if possible, and just give people a bit of background about what you do in terms of the legal aspect and what ALSF is all about, and under your capacity under ALSF. So over to you.
Thank you, Lizzie. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you for the kind words as you made the introductions. As mentioned, my name is Cynthia Kanyindi. I'm legal counsel at the African Legal Support Facility, and it is hosted by the African Development Bank. At the ALSF, we are an international organization that deals with capacity building and advisory services to the African governments. We provide that kind of support. We believe in equipping the continent with the right skills to negotiate all sorts of commercial complex transactions. We work across 4 main portfolios, rightfully as PPPs, energy or power, as well as natural resources and sovereign finance. But obviously, for the purposes of this particular session, we're going to only focus on PPPs. As legal counsel, I am tasked with assisting governments with structuring PPP projects, or in any other sector that they have an interest in. We are demand-driven, so governments will write and request for support from the ALSF. We will do a due diligence on the prospectus of the request and then help them, walk with them anyway on the journey of structuring that project. We work very closely with international counsel that partner with local counsel as well in those various countries in order to ensure that we are providing the right advisory services that are tailored to that government in the sector that they have an interest in developing a project in. So in a nutshell, really, that's what we do at the ALSF.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And I like the fact that we've brought a legal eye to this. So what we've also kind of found out is when we do a lot of programs and we do a lot of commitments, the legal aspect, usually not a lot of people focus on it. So thank you very much, Cynthia, for just being here to kind of shed more light from that perspective. Just a bit of history. As I mentioned earlier on, we're going to focus on 2 key areas. This is PPP for the youth, but from the lens of the Agenda 2063 and SDG goals. And what we know when we talk about the Africa we want, which is the slogan that goes with Agenda 2063, this is an African blueprint and master plan for transforming Africa into the global powerhouse of the future. So we're trying to make sure that Africa itself can produce enough to actually look at after the 54 countries. So we're looking at an Africa we want, where we're all self-sustained. It is the continent's strategic framework that aims to deliver on its goal of inclusive and sustainable development, and is a concrete manifestation of the Pan-African drive for unity, self-determination, freedom, progress, and collective prosperity. I need to highlight that I'm actually reading this directly from the African Union website. And when we talk about SDG goals, we know we have 17 goals that cuts across different sectors. So the SDG goals is one that really we're trying to run out. We're trying to make sure that everything falls into place, because we only have a couple of years before, we start stock taking on whether we've actually, reached all the targets for all the 17 goals, and this is before 2030. So we're just going to dive into it. And given the fact that we only have one speaker, we're going to twist things a bit and do type your question or do raise your hand anytime that we're having this conversation, so that we make it an open first session of the day. So when Cynthia is going to be addressing some of the questions, and maybe you get an aha moment, or you need some more clarity and clarification on something, please feel free to raise hands so that we don't make it more of a, we're pumping information. Let it be more interactive in the morning. So Cynthia, let's just talk about due diligence, and that's something you just mentioned. And we're trying to make sure that when we're talking about agenda 2063 and the SDG goals, we do due diligence across these two sectors. But the idea is also looking at sustainability of these two issues. So what does that look like from your own perspective, from a legal lens, so that we make sure that if it's Agenda 2063, we've learned from what we've gone through with the SDG goals until now, and we're sort of benchmarking. But from your own perspective, how does sustainability look like for you?
Thank you. So I think when we look at due diligence, maybe something I should also mention, this is a good time to mention it, is that at the ALSF, obviously we align our work and our goals and objectives with the Agenda 2063. Sorry, yes, 65. Have I got the years wrong? Sorry. 2063, correct. I'm being ambitious. We do make sure that we are aligned with some of the cross-cutting issues. So one of them is actually youth and gender. So many a times during the due diligence process, we are going to look at what the impact of those projects are going to be, how are they going to trickle down to certain cross-cutting issues. So one of them, as I've mentioned, is gender and youth. The other is climate sustainability, environmental friendliness, and that sort of thing. So we ensure that even as we are onboarded to support governments in structuring the necessary projects, be it a PPP, we make sure that the impact of this project is going to be felt across the board, especially with these key cross-cutting issues. And in this case, we're looking at youth. So we're going to look at the number of jobs that will be created, the impact on employment, unemployment opportunities, and that sort of thing. So at least what we're cognizant of doing at the ALSF is ensuring that we align with the SDGs and the AU agenda to make sure that our work is playing its role in pushing the needle further on these sorts of agendas and these aspects and these ambitions that we have as a continent. Yes, I think you mentioned something on sustainability. Did I get you right?
How can we ensure sustainability for this? So that, the idea is we're looking at 2030, then we're looking at 2063 from an African lens, but yes, sustainability is key. So how can we tap into that and just ensuring that we do achieve sustainability?
I think with sustainability, I would consider us looking at capacity building and just equipping, not only legal professionals or government officials, but really the youth. So that's also a private sector, really at ensuring that we have the right toolkits to get us forward. I think that's going to enable us to ensure sustainability with these projects or with these ambitions and agendas that we have. So we should be able to, look at it from ensuring that we have knowledge hubs that are being created, that we have knowledge tools that are being passed on and can be used over long periods of time in order to ensure that we have sustainability on the continent to, really push these agendas that we're looking at.
Perfect. And I know while you're speaking, there was a key term that you used, jobs, and this results to opportunities. And when we're talking about the 1.8 billion youth and adolescents that we have, key terms that usually are of concern to them is opportunities and jobs. And mapping that for all 54 countries means that this realization of having an African passport needs to be more of a 2030 sort of an idea, not 2063, so that we can facilitate movement across the continent itself. What are your opinions in terms of job creation, knowing that some countries have more opportunities unlike others, and the idea is just to open the borders, so to speak, to facilitate youth movement across the different countries? What would be your opinion on that?
I think on that, every country, certainly it would be great if every country could be speaking the same language. I mean, if every country had, favorable immigration or, travel policies that applied across the board, that would be great. I think what I like is that we're seeing more and more countries at least coming up with better, travel requirements or immigration policies for not only, people of a certain age group, but also the youth. And I think that's going to be important in pushing that that agenda. I know within the EAC region, they have really tried to open up the borders and allow for at least that movement of labor across countries, or at least look at it also looking at it from an angle of reducing the the amount of requirements that you would need. Maybe if you've gone in as a student to, for instance, the Carnegie Mellon University in Rwanda, if you've gone there and you have been admitted on a program, I know that they're considering at least there's room for you once the program is done to at least stay on for a couple of years and see if you can find something or continue on a different program. But at least that's encouraging, and that applies to students from all over the continent, be it East, Central, or South or West, as long as you've been admitted and are doing the program at the university. At least there's that allowance for what happens when you leave, when the program is done. So I think countries are definitely going to need to be more open-minded, with also AFCTA getting hot and heavy with every other passing day. We're going to, I think it's just inevitable that we have to open borders. We have to allow for free movement of labor, across the borders to ensure that, people are not limited by employment opportunities. They should be able to move, someone should be able to move from west to south if there's an opportunity and be able to take it up.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you're emphasizing on being a bit open-minded. If we are to actually, get some things going, and I'm just a bit curious, and I'm sorry I'm bringing the legal perspective from this. I'm just a bit curious on what it means. 54 different countries who have different legal frameworks. How are we going to harmonize and get them on board? I know this is something that the AU is trying to push, but from a legal perspective, harmonizing all these different legal frameworks from the 54 countries, how can we make this more of a realization to facilitate the agendas being something, of concern?
I think working through the regional blocks that we currently have is going to be very key. So, we have SADC for Southern Region African countries. We have EAC, which is the African Community. We have ECOWAS in West Africa, I believe. I think working through those blocks is going to be very important in pushing these agendas and feeding into AU's agenda. So through these blocks, setting up the right regulations and the right protocols that they can work under will at least enable, and I think we have to do it in my opinion. So if we can start at a regional level, so where at least, youth within, for instance, East Africa or Southern Africa can work through, if the SADC region, for instance, can open up opportunities and say, someone with a Mozambique passport can, travel comfortably to say Angola or Zambia or Zimbabwe and apply for a job or be there for a certain period of time, without a visa and that sort of thing. I think if we can have those regional blocks really putting weight behind at least promoting free trade movement and that sort of thing, then we can have, I think that will have a ripple effect in feeding into just the continental agenda. I think that will enable us to then have the continent open up more. But I would look at it from a whole piecemeal. I think I would look at it in a piecemeal as a way. So just doing it by region by region, if we can have at least movements within particular regions, and then eventually I think that will just naturally, well, that's my hope anyway, with the right frameworks, that would then inform what kind of protocols we should have at a continental level to ensure that there's now free movement across the African continent.
Perfect. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, before we tap into what usually makes the youth wake up, opportunities, financing, where can we find this? Thank you very much for joining this session. It's the first session for the YIDP Summit, and we're still expecting 2 speakers to join. This is Calvin Yamache and Dr. and soon to be Professor Chris. But in the meantime, we do have Cynthia Kankidi from the Africa Legal Support Facility who's been speaking. And this is part of the Africa Development Bank. So usually when you hear Africa Development Bank, that's where the money is. So we're going to ask her to let us know where the money is and how can the youth tap into this. But in the meantime, I'll just do a real quick reminder of what this session is all about. And we're looking at public-private partnerships in generating new investments, opportunities, and financing for the youth in Africa in the realization of the SDG goals. This is 2030, so we only have a couple of years to start taking stock of what we've done and where is the shortfall, what are the challenges we face, etc. But we also have an interesting one. The Agenda 2063 is more of an African footprint. So this is looking at how we can have the Africa that we want. So when we were talking, and Cynthia was mentioning a lot of things from a legal perspective, we're in the session where we're talking about youth, but we're also looking at PPPs in terms of how we can get the youth-formed platforms already. We know we have a lot of youth within the continent, and they already have, some of them are already like grouped, and they have their own groups that are working. How can we tap into those platforms, those consortiums that they have? Because the youth are actually coming out pretty strongly within the continent. And for example, I can give you an example of the Africa Youth Malaria organizations that are being formed. So ALMA has a lot of branches within different countries. So we've seen that the youth are already, they know what they want, they're integrating, they're forming, they're mobilizing. How can we tap into these already existing platforms to further the 2063 agenda and also to realize the SDG goals? So Cynthia, looks like this is going to be an all-female panel, but Collins, if any of the 2 other speakers do join, do let us know so that we can actually just kind of, loop them into the conversation. But in the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining. Do type in your question, comments, use the hand. I like when the hands are being raised because it becomes more engaging. But Cynthia, back to you. How can we use the already formed youth groups, to help tap into this massive human resource and help us further the agenda for these 2 key discussions?
Yeah, thank you. So I would think that with the already established platforms, youth platforms, already doing amazing work on the continent, I would think we need to then look at how we can support them to further their agendas and in turn feed into the SDGs and the AU agenda. So certainly, they're in operation, so they're definitely operation costs that they're meeting, or any form of they're definitely needing financing to go on with their with their programs and their activities. So I think any form of subsidies that we can give them, especially from the public sector perspective, so looking at governments or even international organizations facilitating them from a financial angle, I think would be great for them. That will make life easy for them. That will allow them to, operate with ease, or at least some level of ease, to be able to push these agendas. So I'm looking at, forms of subsidies or incentives that can really allow them to thrive successfully in the different sectors that they're working in. I think also another way we can support and tap into already existing platforms for the youth is, really also extra support in terms of capacity building. I don't think that can be stressed enough. Boosting their skill set. We're living in a world that is ever changing. Their innovation, I think, every other minute of the day. And, you want them to be able to feel equipped, to exist in a world that is consistently changing. So, supporting them through, training programs or capacity building programs that can allow them to really thrive in their different fields, I think would also be a great way of tapping into the existing platforms that we have. I know the bank, the AFDB has something called Boost Africa, which really is youth oriented, and it has different pools of assistance that it can give. So that ranges from technical to investment, to capacity. And these are pools that, these platforms can tap into, be able to be allowed to access a various range of investors and partners that could actually that they can work with to push their different agendas and programs. So I think that would be great. So, using such institutions that can provide this assistance, I think would be great.
And I know the discussions around the continent, especially with like the president of Rwanda is looking at Africa being more sustainable in the sense that we move from donor reliance, but looks like for us to realize this, and in terms of PPPs, then then there is still a need for us to still, get some finance assistance if we are to achieve Agenda 2063. What are your thoughts around the push of becoming, less donor reliant and being more pro-Africa and supporting our own initiatives? How realistic is that from your own lens?
I think it's realistic and I think it's achievable, but we will need time, I think, to get to where to that level. But I also think something that could drive or support us being more reliant on ourselves as countries or as a continent is really looking at policy reforms within countries. I think if there is more willingness from public sector, especially to finance, to provide these different policy reforms, that touch on key elements of youth-led ventures, I think that will enable us to move away from donor-funded mechanisms and that sort of thing, because you will find that a youth or a group of people have a great idea and they don't feel like there's enough backing maybe from their home countries, or they're not able to get the right resources and that whatnot. So they go out looking for foreign investments and foreign investors. But I think if we have policies that are supporting homegrown solutions from the youth within our borders, then you will have, I think, within a number of years, we'll then gradually see that we actually are able to finance. You're able to find financing on the continent. So, and I like that there's also a lot of you see a lot of now local or African angel investors, I think that's what they call them, really coming up and supporting, fellow African ideas and that sort of thing. So I think we need to then facilitate those investors more. So if you're an African angel investor, what is it going to take for you to support, an African youth-led venture on the continent? So that goes back to policies. You have to incentivize them to want to put money on the continent and really facilitate these sorts of programs. So I think it's possible. I think we can move away from international donors, but we definitely need to look internally. We then need to be able to provide these sorts of resources, tap into our national budgets, really change a couple of things to ensure that we can actually support them homegrown. And I think it's very possible. I think Rwanda is doing well with it. In that sense, I think they've really ensured that, they're opening up those sorts of reforms for homegrown solutions for youth-led ventures, through incubators, through accelerator programs, and really ensuring that they can have that ecosystem built within.
Okay, and I like the fact that we were talking about Rwanda, because the Women Deliver conference that was recently just held, it was also pro-women, pro-girls, but the Rwandan Minister of Youth also kind of publicly announced his support to the youth. And we know a lot of governments make commitments publicly, but usually nobody is kind of tracking or holding them accountable. So how can the youth, with their own voices, kind of hold the people in government, the people in power, accountable for this commit. And there's a lot of commitments that they make for on behalf of the youth without the youth even knowing. So what opportunity is there? I mean, because when we talk about opportunities, really, it's not all about finances or investments. There's somewhere you can just voice and lobby and advocate for commitments to be, to get the governments held accountable. What would be your feedback on that, especially for the youth, in terms of holding people accountable? By people, I mean
I know. I mean, even us who are outside, slowly getting out of the youth bracket, I find it hard to hold our governments accountable, and we're much older. So I don't know. It's quite a heavy ask. I think a number of resources that I've read are you really advertise or encourage anyway for dialogues that are multi-stakeholder. So you have youth representation, you have women representation, you have government, you have private sector. And I think through those dialogues, that would be an avenue in which you can then hold the government accountable to. I know you'll maybe see it more towards elections, and I think that's a very common thing. You'll see once you're getting maybe to election season, then there's probably more involvement from government, and they come to the grassroots, and then they're having, town halls and that sort of thing. But we shouldn't wait for, for an election season for us to then hold governments accountable and say, okay, since we voted you into power, what have you done? Or this hasn't been done, and that sort of thing. I think it should be a very periodic thing. And I really, I'm sorry, I'm so biased. I keep using Rwanda examples, but you'll find that President Kagame is very keen on having periodic country visits. So he'll go up country and make quite a number of visits, and they're quite successful. They'll have town hall meetings where they're checking on the progress of projects, either that are being done by the government or the private sector. Youth are given quite an opportunity to even attend these forums and these discussions, and they're able to voice and raise their concerns or get assistance on something and get a solution really on how to move something forward. So I think we need to have periodic dialogues, I think public would be good, but if that's not the case, that's also fine. But really have periodic dialogues that involve the youth, that involve government, that involve private sector. And I think that's one way we can definitely hold governments accountable. Another way, which I think is a very powerful tool that has come up over the years, is just the use of media. I think you'll see a lot of young people really speaking up online about different issues, and that's ranging from economics to politics. And I like that there's that hunger and that interest in how things are being done by governments on the continent. So I think using media is also a fantastic forum. I think it's already working well in a number of countries, at least that promote freedom of speech anyway. And I think the youth are really coming up. People are setting up beat spaces or, holding their own little town halls to really discuss these issues. And I think that has pushed governments to almost stay alert. You'll now find a number of government institutions have, Twitter handles or, Instagram pages or whatever it is, their websites are you're almost supposed to keep them up to date, which I think is a great way of also holding them accountable. So using the media, I think is also another helpful tool, really. I think that's going to help us push a good conversation and hold our governments accountable over the years.
Yeah, and thank you very much for bringing that aspect of media. And we've seen the power of social media. And I think this is one of the opportunities that it's being used, it's being utilized, but it's also like a powerful voice to get attention of people in power, people in government. And yes, it looks like a lot of examples are being drawn from Rwanda, but I like the angle that you brought in, the president doing, up-country visits. Now we have two dynamics where we have the urban and the rural youth. And in terms of opportunities and investment, and there's a digital divide, and this was clearly seen during COVID-19. There's a whole digital divide. We're trying to also struggle to stay, up to par with the global north. What would be your advice in terms of that divide where we have the urban youth, we have the rural youth, and when we're talking about opportunities, and when we're looking at the SDG goals, there has to be quality, there has to be a leveled platform. How can we get there? Because it looks like there's still a challenge.
That's a good one, and I think that's a very valid concern, and we do see it everywhere. That's a tricky one. I think we would then. I'm really trying to think of how to. It's such a valid concern. Leveling the playing field for urban youth and rural youth is going to, all that's coming to my mind is really needing, good policy reform. So if you're going to connect, and this is where I think the public sector comes in, and I think typically in PPPs, as you'll see, is you have two parties, and what will happen is that a project is built with those two parties, and the strengths of each party is what actually makes that project succeed. So in this case, you'll find that the public sector, which is government, has the ability to, for instance, construct a road or build a hospital or build a school, while the private sector will now come in with the skills and the know-how in terms of management, operation of that facility or that service. So I think when I think of how we can level the playing field for urban youth and rural youth, I'm just thinking of digital and physical infrastructure. Only just within the central or the capital of the city, capital city, but really spreading it across the country up to the rural point. Can someone easily, get internet connection and find out what's happening or stay up to date on resources and opportunities? I think also physical infrastructure, so that's really connectivity to roads, water, electricity, all that plays a part, because you need to build a good ecosystem that enables you to thrive as an individual. And if the youth in the urban centers are, having access to all these things, you can leave your home, get transport to go to, your nearest cafe, or, go to a hospital, go to school, go to university with ease. How about the youth who's in the village who has to walk miles, unfortunately, to get to the nearest, town center, health center, or school? I think government can come in, or public sector can definitely work with the private sector, I think in this case, where they are, once you've built a road, that will incentivize someone to come and set up a business, or set up a school, or set up a health facility. And in that turn, then you're leveling. I think slowly you start leveling the playing field and allow for accessibility to the same resources urban youth has with the rural youth. And I think that would enable us. Definitely COVID, the pandemic really brought out, I want to say, expose the dirty laundry. It really showed where we're lacking and where we need to do better. You would have, unfortunately, especially with education at that time, most of the learning moved online. So, it was quite difficult, where you had, parents who were able to afford internet and computers and iPads. Those students were able to keep learning without any break, while you had maybe someone who had come to the city center to go to a good school, but then now the schools were closed, they had to go back home to the village. They don't have that accessibility. And what I saw, I think, happening in Uganda, I think what they tried to do anyways with the Ministry of Education was have regular TV sessions where the teachers would actually come online, have different programs on the national television stations where they would actually teach, or do it either via TV or via radio. Radio is usually more accessible to everybody across. But, we need to have good physical and digital infrastructure, I think, both in the urban and the rural settings, to enable the youth to have the same accessibility to those resources.
Great. I mean, I know that question was a bit kind of spicy,
Yeah.
but I like that angle that you brought, because you've touched on how the public sector kind of provides, you know, the legal framework, the environment, the private sector brings in all the resources, and we see that's where the opportunity comes for the youth. That's where they tap into the job opportunities and even collaborative lenses and angles. Now we have 20 minutes to go, and I think we'll just run into the Q&A session or the comment session. And I know I've seen 2 comments. So one is, this is a very engaging conversation. Thank you, Kankindi, for those expert insights. Indeed, we see potential for self-sufficiency through youth-focused policy change. And I like that fact. And you also reiterated on it. There has to be some policy reforms. I think that's the term that you use. So we have Birhan. I don't know whether Birhan, you're still in the room or you dropped off. We would love this to be as entertaining and as engaging as possible. I know it's still a bit early for people, or a bit late, but I'm not so sure whether Birhan, you're still there. Collins, is Birhan still there, or he's logged off? Should be okay. But Birhan wrote that quality education is one of the SDGs, but in our continent, there's no enough strategies to implement. Would you suggest anything on this regard, please? So before you answer that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining. This is the first session of the day. Looks like it's an all women-powered session. We're still waiting for 2 of our speakers to join in, Kelvin and Dr. Chris, both from the African Union. Once they do, please, Collins and the team, please just let us know. I know we're running a bit out of time, but question back to you. Quality education, are there enough strategies to implement this?
Thank you. That's a really good question. And I think education honestly is a foundation for quite a number of things in our society. So the way, I mean, you starting out right with the education, definitely, you know, puts you on the right path, I believe, in life. With quality education, I think what I would you suggest anything in this regard? I think in terms of strategies, once again, that really comes down to, you know, national policies and strategies in place for promoting quality education. I know a number of countries have done a couple of PPPs in the education field. I think Uganda has done a couple. You have also a lot of collaborations with in Kenya as well. Rwanda as well is leading on that. And that's really what we need, in my opinion, is you need to facilitate these strategies in such a way that you are attracting and setting up the right frameworks in order to achieve quality education. So you'll see that some international universities have started opening up branches in African countries on the continent. And I think this is one step of us ensuring that we have quality education for our youth on the continent. I know that a great example is the Carnegie Mellon University in Rwanda. Its main campus is in Pittsburgh in the USA, but through partnerships with the government has been able to set up and be in place for about 10 years. It attracts quite a number of talented youth from across the continent in STEM-related subjects, offers master's programs for about 2 years. And I think it also encourages a lot of innovation on the campus. So even the way the campus is built, your students are not only getting classroom, obviously learning, but even just practical experience. And it has been a great source of a number of youth-led companies. I know quite a good number of innovations have come out of CMU alumni on the continent. And I think we need to have governments really promote such facilities and such infrastructure. So if you're building and setting up and creating new investment environments that encourage these sorts of things, then without a doubt, we can have strategies that promote good and quality education that would feed us into achieving our objectives under the Agenda 2063. So I think for sure, these strategies can be done. It will just come down to political will. And I think the private sector is a great partner for the government and public sector to ensure these strategies are set up rightly. I think with public schools, some of them are great, but they do get overwhelmed. I mean, I think government should slowly move away from, there are certain things it can definitely take care of because it's well placed too. But I think with things like education and with how fast the world is developing, with promotion of innovation and that sort of thing, the private sector, has these resources. It has the time, it has the money, it can feed into, building a suitable school that would actually provide quality education and skill set for this modern world. I think many times public schools are very traditional and they haven't fully opened up to the changing world that we're living in. So I think in terms of strategies, I would look at it from a public sector perspective, in the sense of having the right infrastructure set up and the right investment environment for education investors to really come in and provide quality education to our youth.
Yeah, makes sense. And I know when we're talking about PPPs and we have, we're requesting for, an environment, a conducive environment to also like foster PPPs. We need to be a bit realistic also. So I'm using the word realistic because I have a question here. We're talking about 2030, which was, we had the Millennial Development Goals. Now we moved to the SDG goals, which is 2030, and it's just across the corner so that we start taking stock. Now we're looking at 2063, and it looks like 63 is still a couple of years to go, so we're a bit reluctant into pushing. But I do know one of the key issues in the Agenda 2063 is also to have an African passport that will allow free movement across the continent. So my question is, how realistic is it? We have 54 countries already. We're having issues just getting visa free. And I know the president of Kenya, Dr. William Ruto, is really pushing for having, partnerships where we don't have visa to move to other countries. And that's a big kudos to his government. But how realistic is it having an African passport? And how realistic is it when we talk about free trade and free movement? Is this something we'll attain? Does it look like we can attain this by 2063? I mean, it seems a bit far, but there are a lot of legal issues that we need to look into, and we're coming out of a pandemic which really kind of dismantled a lot of things and brought a lot of things into questioning. What are your thoughts around this?
Just as you said, we're coming out of a pandemic, so priorities are different right now. Countries are trying to recover, businesses are trying to recover, people have had to re-strategize a number of things in order to be able to, keep afloat or get their feet back on solid ground. So I think 2063 years sounds far, but I don't think we should get comfortable that we have the convenience of time. It's important that that African passport objective or plan is then made a priority across the board. And that's going to be quite difficult to push because, as I've said, different countries have different priorities, national priorities. So you might find for, Kenya or Uganda, that's something that's top of their list right now, and they are working towards it. So they are ensuring that they have all these essential agreements between countries, to facilitate this, either visa-free arrangements or, really even having a passport that would allow you to cross with ease or apply across the board. But it's really going to come down to priorities of countries at the time. And I think if that's not the case, if we don't have a uniform priority across all 54 states, as you put it, it's going to be quite difficult to push. And I think that's why, for me, I think looking at this in a piecemeal approach would be a great way of us trying to get there. It might take long, but in my opinion, unless you have everyone on the same page, it's going to be quite difficult. So I would look at it in piecemeal, as I had said earlier. So really starting at a regional level and then moving on to a more continental level. So you can see with Kenya, I believe the president, I think recently, I think he's pushing, I think he approved it, the one for visa-free for Kenyans for 90 days to South Africa. Is that how it's, yeah, so you'll see that, different countries are now just it's kind of like you get a few that you can work with, make the deal, make that a reality, at least for your citizens, and then open up that market to the youth in those countries. So I think we can, I hope to God we'll all be, alive to hold an African passport. That would be great. I would love to visit as many countries as I can. But my thinking is that is going to have to be done in a more piecemeal approach, and that sense of prioritizing this sort of thing to promote this and facilitate, free trade movement and that sort of thing, and labor will have to be really pushed. It will have to be an agenda that's pushed heavily from the top and then trickled down. So I think AfCFTA is going to really push that conversation. So I'm hopeful about that. I think the more and more countries, sign on onto the AfCFTA, and now the more we see results of it, and we're actually seeing, the impact of the free trade area, I think that's going to now make it more of a reality. So I would take it a step back and say, let's make AfCFTA a reality. Let's actually have positive impact. Let's see results that will then motivate countries to say, okay, I think we can now we can consider, that sort of passport facilitation for youth.
Yeah, and let me go back to the comments. I think it's too early for people to raise their hands. I promise I will not ask you to have your camera on. I know how early or late it is. So we have Maina Mahinda. So Maina is saying, thanks, Lizzie. How do we deliver sustainable PPP projects and programs, especially in addressing leadership integrity, systemic corruption, especially with public sector officials? And I know usually that's the elephant we try and avoid, because when we talk about public space, you think corruption, and there's a whole mindset that we need to change. But the question is, how do we deliver sustainable PPP programs? And I also wanted to know if within the participants here, if any of your countries has some sort of a legal framework or a directive where if there's a project coming in, there's an X slot of work for the youth. And I think that is something that needs to also be looked into. So yeah, I know I've seen a hand up. Oh, it's gone down. So let's just tackle this question when we're talking about delivering sustainable PPP projects and programs. And ladies and gentlemen, we're wrapping up. So when Cynthia, you're answering to that question, it will be good for also give your own parting shots, closing remarks, so that we can hand over the program back to YIDP.
Thank you, Lizzie. That's a really nice question, Maina. Thank you for it. How do we deliver a sustainable PPP project and program, especially in addressing leadership integrity? I think one of the key characteristics of a PPP project is, allocation of risk. So it's important that in any PPP project, the risk allocation is done in such a way that the party who is the most able to handle that risk then, takes that responsibility. And I think what you will find in a number of PPP projects is that the private sector will be more inclined to deal with the management, the operation, the implementation of the PPP project, while the government will then be tasked with either providing the infrastructure or providing an incentive, say tax or registration and license related incentives, to the private sector. So that's how that partnership will be built. In terms of how we can deliver it in a sustainable manner, I would say looking at your contract, the way that contract will be drafted will be key to the sustainability of the PPP project. So you want to ensure that you have good monitoring and evaluation clauses in there that provide for how you're going to keep tabs basically, and promote the success and the sustainability of that PPP project. So it's going to be key on how you draft that contract in that case, looking at also how you draft your dispute and resolution clauses, what happens in cases where there is a default. I think that is what will enable a PPP project to be successful and sustainable. So you also want to ensure that you have the right really checks and balances within your contract, because the strength of the contract will enable that project to actually be a success and be sustainable. I know that there are also some good reporting mechanisms. That's one that I noted down, which really looks at what you can also implement into the contract. I think it's international practices, really, international forms of reporting. So you really want to ensure that you have good, reporting mechanisms to ensure that that PPP project is, being done on a good, accountable sort of manner. And I think with the public sector and corruption, I really don't want to touch into it, but my thinking would be the way parties will allocate risk in that PPP project will be key. I think once you have more involvement of the private sector dealing with the nitty-gritties, really looking at the implementation of that project, then that is what will be that I think will help push the PPP project and help it be sustainable and successful in that sense.
And I want to cut you a bit. Looks like our participants have actually become a bit lively. There is a question, there's a hand, and there's a hand.
No problem.
Great. And I'm being advised that we do have Dr. Eden from the Nairobi County. We do recognize, and we were attacking the public space. So I think at that time it would have been good to get the feedback. And just a quick one. So PPP is a big question, especially for young people. Do you believe that we will ever have young people partnering with governments without having a social connection to government? I think that's one of the main challenges youth are facing, especially when it comes to working with the public space. But it will be good to have your input on that.
Yeah, so that's a good one. And I know that's a very common issue in different countries on the continent, wondering how do I get, a partnership with the government, especially just being youth and maybe not having that much of experience or even, capital to start with for these sorts of projects. But I think it's going to be possible. I think through, and one idea I have is on how the youth could possibly partner with government is through these different incubators and accelerator programs. I think would be great. I think that's a way for those facilities, those incubators, or those innovation hubs provide an opportunity for the youth to harness their skills, right from technical skills, contract negotiation. I know there are some that even take youth through that, as well as even just fine-tuning, say, your product, your service, or your tool that you have available that can deal with an issue or solve a solution in the society. So I feel like there is an opportunity for young people to partner with governments, but it will come down to how they structure their partnership with the government. So I think it will be key to ensure that the youth are well skilled in order to, not only in the technical sense, but even in just contract negotiation with government. So you really have to be all-rounded. So that's technical, financial, and legal to be able to really present and pitch yourself to the government. So we need to then heavily invest in, skill enhancement, skill development, really ensuring that the youth are empowered enough to actually go ahead and partner. Because in my opinion, I think, any sane government, and I stand to be corrected, if you have a product or a service or a solution being offered to you, that that is going to have a ripple effect on, say, job creation or, income, money flow in the country and that sort of thing, you're definitely going to want to take it up. And I think the youth should also start with, I want to say, be ambitious and yes, go for the really big deals, but even starting out small would be great. So really don't limit yourself. Start, you can start at with a small scope of a project or a small scope of a contract, and really just build your experience, build your ability, and really governments without a doubt are going to want to partner, because solutions, I mean, with the way the world is going, I can't emphasize the innovations left, right, and center, and government is going to need that support. It's going to need that support. I think the youth are better placed to provide these sorts of partnerships.
Okay, yeah, I hear you. I know there was a hand from YIDP. I don't know whether that hand is still there. Do you still have a question to ask? Because we've literally run out of time. But ladies and gentlemen, this was the first session of the day, and we were looking at public-private partnerships in generating new investments, opportunities, and financing for the youth in Africa in the realization of SDGs. This is 2030 and Agenda 2063. And our panelist was Cynthia Kankidi. And Cynthia, thank you very much for, just sparring on for a whole hour without the other two representatives, but we're hoping that they would join in, because the summit is a 2-day summit. But in your parting shot, what would be your last remarks?
Thank you, Lizzie. This has been very interesting. I didn't think I would talk alone, well, with you anyway. But I think really my parting shots is that I think the youth are, I think this, for me, I'm confident that, our future is bright. I think there's a lot that the youth can do and that the youth are already doing. I love to see the ideas that are coming up. I love to see the energy and the involvement, the level of involvement that the youth have now in public dialogues, public matters, I think is superb. I think PPPs are a great avenue if well structured from the beginning, because that usually informs how successful and how sustainable that project shall be. And I think youth should definitely open up their minds to partnering with the private sector and with public sector as well, to really achieve a lot of their ideas. I think there's a lot of potential that PPPs can offer to youth-led ventures across different sectors which are critical right now, like health and education. I think we can see, I think there's hope for us to see results that can really feed into the agendas that we are talking about. There's a chance for us to increase the jobs, the number of jobs that we're looking at on the continent. As you said, 1.8 billion youth. I mean, they have to work. I mean, we have to make that happen. And I think PPPs are a great form of that. I mean, we remain available at the LSF to provide any form of support and training and capacity building. I would encourage everyone to visit our website. I probably will leave it with one of the organizers. We have an academy on there that really has a vast amount of information that is free and accessible, and it would be great for you to have a look at it and see how you can use that in your different fields. Yes, that's all for me.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cynthia. This was amazing. I just realized we hit the 1 hour mark, but I mean, I don't know whether Dr. Eden, if you're in a position to just give a comment in terms of PPPs and how we can foster opportunities for the youth. I'm not so sure whether Dr. Eden is still in the call. Collins, is Dr. Eden still there?
Good morning. I hope by Dr. Eden, you mean Dr. Isam?
I'm assuming it's. I'm assuming that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. So,
yes. So if you can
Isam
give us any parting shot, I know I'm throwing you under the bus, but the conversations were around PPPs, fostering collaboration, investment opportunities for the youth. It will be good if you just take like 2 minutes just to give your own sentiments on this.
Okay. Well, I think what Cynthia has been talking about is very vital. What I would like to brush on is that government does give opportunities to youth to apply for procurement of items. And I know that for Nairobi City County government, when we were doing our annual procurement plan in the health sector, that these opportunities are captured in planning. I think for the issues of PPP, we really need to look at our stakeholders. And I believe the most important stakeholders here are adolescents and youth. We assume that we cannot have bright ideas, and we really need to go through the approach of bottom-up approach. I've been a medsup of Mutwini, and we really hold close community-based organizations to engage the community, and they usually come up with brilliant ideas. However, grant application is very bureaucratic. And that is a place that we really need to start the discussions. These people who form the communities or based on the adults and the youth are people who have missed opportunities in terms of education, in terms of accessibility to healthcare. And we need to start talking about how we can empower them to apply for grants, for ideas that they feel will empower them. I feel that is the actual way to go, because it will deal with ownership and sustainability. When programs are designed from top down, one of the major failures, and I think the Harvard Business School usually say 70% of top-down approach kind fails. So that is what I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about us giving the youth and adolescents, those who haven't had opportunities, have focused group discussions, support them, reduce the bureaucratic challenges of applying for grants. Nairobi City County government is really looking at developing a research and grants department through the NIH fund. So for me, we are a very we are a kind of team that thinks outside the box. Lastly, but not least, I think something else that is very important to note is the issue of research. When you're doing research, especially qualitative research, and engaging with the youth and adolescents in issues of teenage pregnancies, poverty, and all these other issues, health issues, we need to start designing our research to look at the positive side of data. And what I mean by that is, for example, if you having teenage pregnancies at, let's say, hypothetically 10% within Nairobi County, that's hypothetical data, 90% is actually teens not getting pregnant. So you have to really come and look at it. So within the research cohort, despite the fact we have incidence rates that are associated with poor outcomes, so for example, like teenage pregnancies, within the same cohort, we have the other side of the coin. And the other side of the coin means, just reversing the statement, 90% of the cohort are teenagers not getting pregnant. So we really need to focus also on that cohort and try to understand what are these unique systems that govern the teenagers living in Kibra, for example. That only 10% are getting pregnant, but what are the rest doing that are not getting pregnant? So I would really love to engage with the various stakeholders here. And I want to thank the partner, the Youth Initiative Development Program. I would love to have further engagement to discuss about innovative ideas and engage youth at a bottom-up level. So thank you very much. I hope I was not, I didn't talk too much.
Carry on. I think I cut you short. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine, Dizzy. I know I was a bit late due to competing interests, but I'm happy to have these 2 or 3 minutes.
And we're excited to have you to just give in there the public face. And I like what you've emphasized on. It's good that we know the numbers, 10% of adolescents are getting pregnant, but there's something we're doing right in order to prevent the 90% from, getting pregnant. So thank you very much for highlighting that. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the end. And my apologies for taking 9 more minutes of your precious time. I need to hand over the program back to YIDP, but it was amazing. Thank you, Cynthia, very much for creating time. And thank you, YIDP, for organizing this. So Collins and the team, over to you. But just to give a summarized version of what we discussed today under the PPP and exploring innovative opportunities for the youth, we need to be a bit open-minded Let's look at the legal structures and the frameworks that are there, use the regional blocks and the regional bodies that exist to help further this discussions. And we have to have some sort of commitment. So this is also making finances available for the youth, and also making sure that we're holding governments and other institutions accountable for the commitments that they put forward. And of course, let's use what we can as youth to champion what we want, and the Africa that we want to see as far as the Agenda 2063 is concerned.